Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval sheep pasture, and I need you to understand something right from the start. You're not going to make it. I know what you're picturing: rolling green hills, fluffy sheep grazing peacefully. Maybe you're leaning on a wooden staff looking all pastoral and serene like you just walked out of a fantasy novel. But here's the reality. It's 4A. It's March in rural England circa 1320, and you're about to discover that medieval shepherding is less peaceful countryside vibe, and more please God let me survive until sunset. The sheep smell like death and wet wool. Your fingers are already numb, and somewhere in the darkness, something is making a sound that definitely isn't a sheep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this community spans the globe. Simeon's winding down in California, while someone else is just starting their day in Tokyo. It's pretty amazing. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you need to understand about medieval sheep pastures is that they operate on a schedule designed to break human beings. You're waking up at what modern people would call an absolutely unreasonable hour, but what medieval shepherds called already late. It's somewhere between 3:30 and 4 a.m. And there's no alarm clock, just the ingrained terror that if you're not in that pasture before dawn, you're going to lose sheep, and losing sheep means losing everything. You stumble out of whatever rough sleeping situation you've got going on. Maybe it's a corner of your family's one-room cottage. Maybe it's a drafty shepherd's hut on the hillside that you share with another shepherd and approximately 4,000 fleas. There's no electricity. Obviously, no bathroom, no running water. You're doing your business in the dark, probably in a designated corner or outside if you're lucky, and you're doing it fast because every minute you waste is a minute the sheep are unsupervised. The darkness is profound in a way that modern people simply cannot comprehend. We're so used to light pollution, to streetlights and phone screens and the ambient glow of civilization, that we've forgotten what real darkness feels like. This darkness is thick, almost tangible. If there's a moon, great, you can see vague shapes and shadows. If there's no moon, you're navigating by memory and prayer. You might have a small rushlight or a tallow candle, but these are precious resources. You're not wasting good lighting on a walk you make every single day. The cold is immediate and invasive. March in medieval England is not the gentle arrival of spring that you're imagining. It's freezing rain, biting wind, frost on the ground, and temperatures that hover just above freezing if you're lucky. You're wearing layers of wool because of course you are. You work with sheep, but medieval wool clothing isn't the soft merino or cashmere you're thinking of. The scratchy. It's heavy when it gets wet, which is always. And it smells like lanolin and sheep grease and your own sweat because, surprise, you haven't bathed in weeks. Your boots, if you even have proper boots, are leather that's been dubiously waterproofed with animal fat. More likely, you've got cloth wrapped around your feet and tied with leather strips. Your feet are already cold, and they're going to stay cold for the next 14 hours. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had higher pain tolerances or just no other choice but to endure. But either way, you're about to find out firsthand. You're carrying a staff not because it looks cool, but because it's literally the only thing between you and a 200-pound ram with aggression issues. You've also got a sling for throwing stones at predators or wayward sheep, a small knife that's probably the most valuable thing you own, and maybe a piece of hard bread or cheese wrapped in cloth if you remembered to save something from last night's dinner. The walk to the pasture is treacherous. The paths are uneven, muddy, scattered with rocks and roots and the occasional hole that could snap your ankle if you're not careful. There are no guardrails, no safety measures, nothing. You could step wrong, tumble down a hillside, break your leg, and that's idiocy done. No one's calling an ambulance. You'll lie there until someone finds you, and if they don't find you before the wolves do, well, that's just medieval life. You're not alone on this pre-dawn journey, though. Other shepherds are making their way to their own flocks, silent shapes moving through the darkness. You might nod at each other, might exchange a brief grunt of acknowledgement, but there's no chatting. Everyone's too cold, too tired, too focused on getting to their sheep and making sure they survive the night. Because here's something you probably didn't consider. Sheep die all the time. They die from disease, from predators, from eating the wrong thing, from just deciding to lie down and give up. Every morning is a potential disaster. You approach your flock with genuine anxiety, doing a quick head count in the dim pre-dawn light, looking for the telltale signs of trouble-scattered sheep, blood on the ground, the eerie silence that means something bad happened. Your sheep are huddled together for warmth, a moving mass of wool and body heat. They're not happy to see you. They're not playful or friendly. These aren't pets. They're livestock, and they regard you with the same suspicion and irritation that you regard them. As you get closer, the smell hits you, a combination of wet wool, manure, urine, and that particular musky scent that sheep just naturally produce. It's overwhelming, especially on an empty stomach in the cold morning air. The first task is to get them moving, to spread them out so they can graze. This sounds simple. It's not. Sheep are simultaneously stupid and stubborn in ways that defy logic. They'll want to stay bunched together, even though they need to spread out to eat. They'll start moving in the wrong direction for no reason. One sheep will get spooked by literally nothing and trigger a mini stampede that you have to contain before they scatter across 3 different pastures. And the rams. Oh, the rams. Let's talk about rams for a second, because if there's one thing that's going to ruin your day immediately, it's an aggressive ram. These animals can weigh 200 to 350 pounds. They've got skulls designed for combat, and they do not care about your authority. A ram that decides it doesn't like you will charge you, and when it hits, it's like being struck by a furry battering ram moving at 20 miles per hour. Shepherds got injured by rams all the time, broken legs, cracked ribs, concussions. There are medieval medical texts that specifically discuss ram-related injuries because they were that common. You're managing all of this while also watching the horizon for threats. Wolves, definitely, but also wild dogs, bears in some regions, and most dangerously other humans. Sheep theft was rampant in medieval times because sheep were incredibly valuable. A single sheep could be worth a significant portion of an average person's annual income. Losing even one sheep to thieves could mean your family doesn't eat this winter. So you're constantly vigilant, constantly scanning, constantly on edge. By the time the sun actually rises, you've already been working for over an hour, and you're exhausted. Your hands are numb, your feet are frozen, your stomach is growling because you haven't eaten, and the sheep are already causing problems. One's limping possible foot rot, which you'll need to check. Another one seems lethargic, could be parasites, could be any number of diseases. A lamb is calling for its mother, who's wandered off because sheep maternal instincts are surprisingly hit or miss. There's no coffee, There's no breakfast break. There's no sitting down for a rest. You're standing in a muddy field, watching sheep eat grass, and you're going to be doing this for the next 12 to 14 hours with maybe one break to eat some hard bread and drink some water from a stream that you really hope isn't contaminated but probably is. And here's the kicker: this is day one. You've got another 364 days of this ahead of you. Same schedule, same cold, same aggressive rams, same constant vigilance. Medieval shepherding wasn't a job. It was a lifestyle of perpetual exhaustion and low-level danger. The mortality rate for shepherds was higher than for many other peasant occupations, and that's saying something in an era when life expectancy was already brutally low. The pasture itself is deceptive. It looks peaceful from a distance, but up close, it's a minefield of hazards. There are marshy sections where sheep get stuck and drown. There are plants that are toxic to sheep, and good luck knowing which ones if you didn't grow up doing this. There are rabbit holes and badger sets that break sheep legs. There are steep sections where pregnant ewes lose their footing and roll down hills. Your job is to somehow prevent all of these disasters while managing a flock of animals that seem actively suicidal. As the morning wears on and the light improves, you start to see the scope of your task more clearly. You've got anywhere from 50 to 200 sheep to manage, depending on whether you're working for yourself, your family, or a lord. Each one needs to be monitored. You need to know their behaviors, recognize when something's wrong, act fast when problems arise. You're essentially a combination security guard, veterinarian, midwife, and prison warden for creatures that have the survival instincts of a lemming convention. The social isolation is already setting in, and it's not even noon yet. You're alone out here except for the sheep. If you're lucky, another shepherd is working a nearby pasture and you can yell back and forth occasionally. But mostly, it's just you, your thoughts, the wind, and several dozen animals that smell like wet dog mixed with barnyard floor. This isolation is going to be a constant companion, and it does things to your mind over time, but we'll get to that later. For now, you're just trying to survive until sunset. You're cold, you're hungry, you're already developing blisters on your hands from the staff, and you've realized something crucial. You haven't even encountered most of the problems yet. The predators, the diseases, the social dynamics of the flock, the economic exploitation, the weather disasters, the lambing season, all of that is still ahead of you. Welcome to medieval shepherding. You're not going to last a day. The sun's fully up now, and you're getting your first good look at the flock in proper daylight. This is when the fantasy completely shatters. You thought sheep were those clean, fluffy white animals you see in children's books and fabric softener commercials. You were wrong. Medieval sheep are walking biological disasters, and you're about to become intimately familiar with every disgusting aspect of their existence. First, let's address the appearance issue. These sheep are not white. They're various shades of brown, gray, black, and what you might generously call off-white, but is really more the color of old dishwater mixed with mud. Their wool is matted, filthy, filled with burrs, thorns, bits of vegetation, dried feces, and things you don't want to identify. The smell intensifies as you move among them. It's not just wool and manure anymore, but also the distinct odor of infected wounds, rotting hooves, and whatever skin conditions are currently making their way through the flock. You're learning quickly that sheep are not a unified, peaceful group. They have a brutal social hierarchy, and right now you're watching it play out in real time. There's a dominant Ulitz, call her the queen bee of this woolly nightmare, and she's asserting her authority by headbutting younger females away from the best grazing spots. Sheep can be genuinely vicious to each other. They bite, they kick, they ram. Lambs get trampled. Weaker sheep get bullied away from food and water until they're malnourished and sick. The rams are even worse. If you've got multiple rams in your flock, and you probably do because controlling breeding in medieval pastures is more art than science theory, constantly fighting for dominance. You watch two of them back up about 20 feet from each other, then charge at full speed, their skulls colliding with a crack that you feel in your own teeth. They stagger, shake it off, and immediately prepare to do it again. This can go on for hours. Sometimes they fight until one of them literally can't stand anymore. Sometimes they fight until one dies from brain trauma. Your job is to somehow manage this violence while also keeping the sheep from killing themselves in stupider ways. Because here's the thing about sheep intelligence, and historians still argue whether medieval breeds were even dumber than modern ones, they are spectacularly bad at survival. You watch one sheep start eating from a patch of grass, and suddenly 15 other sheep abandon perfectly good grazing to crowd into the same spot, trampling each other, fighting for access to grass that's identical to what they were just eating 5 feet away. Another sheep has managed to get its head stuck in a thorn bush. You have no idea how this happened. The bush isn't even that dense. But now you have to go over there, get scratched to pieces pulling the thorns away, and extract a panicking sheep that's fighting you the entire time because sheep's survival instinct apparently includes resist all rescue attempts. Then there's the parasites. Oh, the parasites. Medieval sheep are absolutely infested with parasites, internal and external. You're seeing sheep scratch themselves raw against trees and rocks, rubbing their wool off in patches, leaving bloody streaks on the bark. These are sheep lice, sheep keds, which are actually wingless flies that look like ticks, and various mites. When you get close enough to part the wool and check their skin, which you have to do regularly, you can see the parasites moving. It's like the wool is alive with tiny crawling nightmares. The internal parasites are worse. Though you can't see them directly, you see their effects. Sheep with potbellies but protruding ribs, that's intestinal worms. Sheep coughing and struggling to breathe, a lungworm. Sheep with diarrhea coating their entire back, and liver flukes or other intestinal parasites. There's a medieval remedy book that lists dozens of different treatments for worms in sheep, involving everything from force-feeding them garlic to administering tobacco smoke enemas. None of them work particularly well, but you'll try them anyway because watching your flock slowly waste away is not an option. You're checking hooves now, and this is where things get really unpleasant. Foot rot is endemic in medieval flocks. It's a bacterial infection that makes the hooves smell like death itself, a sweet, putrid odor that makes you gag even when you're already surrounded by sheep smell. The infected tissue is gray-green, soft, and falls apart when you touch it. The sheep is in obvious pain, limping severely, and the infection can spread to bone if left untreated. Your treatment options are limited. Trim away the dead tissue with your knife. The sheep will fight you. Pack the hoof with a poultice made from herbs and animal fat, and hope it heals before the infection spreads or the sheep dies from secondary complications. 3 sheep already have foot rot. You're going to spend the next 2 hours wrestling with terrified, pain-maddened animals while your hands get coated in infected tissue and blood. There's no veterinarian to call. There's no surgical gloves, no antibiotics, no sterile equipment. You've got a knife that you use for everything from cutting bread to castrating lambs, your bare hands, and prayers to whatever saints are supposed to protect Shepherd Saint Wendelin. Maybe or Saint Drogo, though you're not entirely sure which saint handles foot rot specifically. While you're dealing with the infected hooves, you notice another problem. One of the ewes has fly strike. This is a condition where flies lay eggs in the wool, usually around the rear end where it's dirty and damp. The eggs hatch into maggots, and the maggots burrow into the sheep's flesh, eating it alive. You can see the area is swollen. The wool is discolored, and when you part it, there are hundreds of writhing maggots in an open wound. The smell is indescribable, worse than the foot rot, worse than anything you've encountered yet. You have to remove every single maggot. You're picking them out with your fingers, squashing them, scraping them away with your knife, while the sheep struggles and bleats in agony. Then you're packing the wound with something, maybe honey if you can afford it, maybe just salt, maybe a disgusting paste made from bread mold and spider webs that someone told you works. The ewe probably won't survive. Fly strike has a high mortality rate, especially once the maggots reach muscle tissue. But you try anyway because a dead sheep is lost income, and lost income means your family doesn't eat. The flock dynamics are becoming clearer now. There's a definite pecking order, and the sheep at the bottom are in rough shape. There's one ewe that's clearly malnourished, with ribs showing, wool falling out in patches, a dull look in her eyes. She's being actively prevented from eating by the other ewes. Every time she approaches food or water, another sheep drives her away. This is how sheep society works. The weak get weaker until they die, and the flock doesn't care. You try to intervene, but managing individual sheep relationships in a flock of 100 is basically impossible. You can't watch every interaction. You can't force the dominant ewes to share. The best you can do is try to create separate grazing opportunities. But even that doesn't always work because sheep are obsessed with staying together. They have this herd mentality that overrides individual survival needs. One sheep could be starving, but if the flock moves to a new area, that sheep will follow rather than stay and eat. Then there's the diseases you can't see yet but are definitely present. Sheep pox was a major killer in medieval flocks, a viral disease that caused pustules all over the sheep's body, especially around the mouth and genitals. Anthrax killed entire flocks overnight. Sheep measles, liver rot, scrappy, a prion disease that made sheep literally scrape themselves to death against objects, and a dozen other conditions that medieval shepherds had colorful names for but no real understanding of. You're learning to read the signs. A sheep standing separate from the flock sick. A sheep grinding its teeth, pain, possibly poisoning. A sheep walking in circles, brain parasite or neurological disease. A sheep that won't get up, cold, be pregnancy, toxemia. Could be an injury. Could be that the sheep has just given up on living. Each symptom requires investigation, and each investigation usually reveals something horrible. The aggressive behaviors continue throughout the day. You watch a ewe deliberately kick her own lamb away from nursing. Sheep mothers can be surprisingly terrible parents. Some reject their lambs entirely. Some nurse one twin but starve the other. Some seem genuinely annoyed by the whole motherhood situation and take every opportunity to distance themselves from their offspring. The rejected lambs cry constantly, a high-pitched bleating that cuts through everything else, and if you don't intervene, they die. But you can't hand-raise every rejected lamb. You don't have the time, the resources, or the milk supply, so you're making horrible calculations. Which lambs are worth saving, which ones you just let nature take its course with. Medieval sources mention something called pine, which seems to have been a catch-all term for when sheep just lost the will to live. A sheep with pine would stop eating, stop moving, just stand there staring at nothing until it died. Modern veterinarians might diagnose depression or chronic pain or any number of specific conditions, but medieval shepherds just knew that sometimes sheep gave up, and there wasn't much you could do about it. You're also noticing the wounds. Sheep get injured constantly, cuts from thorns, bites from other sheep, tears in the skin from catching on fences or branches. Each wound is a potential site for infection, for fly strike, for blood poisoning. You're checking for wounds, cleaning them with whatever you have, water from the stream. If you're lucky, spit. If you're not, and hoping they heal before something worse develops. The breeding dynamics are another nightmare. Rams don't wait for appropriate seasons or ask permission. They breed whenever they feel like it, which means you get lambs born in the middle of winter when they have basically no chance of survival. You watch a ram mount a ewe who is clearly not interested, pinning her down with his weight while she struggles. There's nothing romantic or natural about this. It's violent, brutal, and happens multiple times a day during breeding season. Some ewes are bred too young, before their bodies are ready, and they die during pregnancy or lambing. Some ewes are bred too old, and the same thing happens. You're supposed to be controlling which rams breed with which ewes to improve the flock. But in reality, you can't watch them 24/7. Rams are surprisingly sneaky and determined. By the time you notice a ram has gotten to a ewe you wanted to keep separate, it's too late. The intelligence issue is really hitting home now. You've been watching these sheep for 8 hours, and you're convinced they're actively trying to die. One sheep keeps trying to eat a plant that you've watched make other sheep sick. You chase it away from the plant. It goes right back. You chase it away again. It waits until you're distracted and goes back. This happens 6 times before you finally just have to stand there guarding this one stupid plant because the sheep is absolutely determined to poison itself. Another sheep has figured out how to get through a gap in the stone wall boundary. Great hat's actually clever for a sheep, except instead of going through the gap to reach better grazing or escape danger, the sheep goes through the gap, stands in the neighboring field for 30 seconds, then comes back through, then does it again and again. You cannot figure out why. The grass is the same. There's nothing different about the other field. The sheep is just going through the gap for fun, or maybe it's stuck in some kind of loop. Historians still argue whether medieval sheep breeds had different cognitive abilities than modern breeds, but honestly, it's hard to imagine them being much worse at decision-making. By mid-afternoon, you've dealt with 3 fights between rams, one ewe with mastitis, infected, extremely painful, often fatal, 2 cases of foot rot, 1 fly strike situation, a minor stampede triggered by a butterfly, and sheep number 67 who keeps falling into the same ditch and has to be pulled out every 20 minutes like some kind of woolly Sisyphus. You're exhausted, you're covered in blood and worse, and you're starting to understand why medieval shepherds had such a reputation for being rough, unsociable people. This job doesn't attract the gentle souls who love nature. It attracts people who are either desperate enough to take any work or crazy enough to think they can outsmart sheep. You're neither, and you're not going to make it. The flock doesn't rest when you rest. They don't stop having problems because you're tired. The hierarchy battles continue. The parasites keep multiplying. The diseases keep spreading. And somewhere in this mass of wool and malice, another sheep is doing something stupid that's going to require your intervention. Welcome to the reality of medieval shepherding. It's not a pastoral idyll. It's a full-time job managing biological disasters with minimal tools, no medical knowledge, and animals that seem designed by nature as a practical joke. The afternoon sun is starting to dip lower, and you've just managed to get the flock settled into a reasonable grazing pattern when you hear something that makes your blood go cold. It's a howl, distant but unmistakable, coming from the forest edge about half a mile away. The sheep hear it too. Their heads snap up in unison, and suddenly the entire flock is alert, tense, ready to panic. You grip your staff tighter and scan the tree line, knowing that wolves are just the beginning of your problems. Let's talk about wolves first, because they're what everyone thinks of when they imagine medieval pastoral dangers. And yes, wolves were absolutely a threat. Medieval Europe still had healthy wolf populations, and they knew that sheep were basically mobile buffets. A single wolf could kill multiple sheep in one attack, not because it needed that much food, but because sheep panic and scatter, and wolves have predatory instincts that trigger when things run. Medieval sources are filled with accounts of shepherds losing entire flocks to wolf packs, coming back to find dozens of dead sheep and trails of blood leading into the forest. But here's what makes wolves particularly terrifying in your situation. You can't actually fight them. You've got a wooden staff, a knife, and maybe some rocks. A wolf weighs 80 to 150 pounds, has teeth designed to crush bone, and operates with pack tactics that have been refined over thousands of years of evolution. If wolves decide they want your sheep, your options are basically make a lot of noise and hope they're not that hungry, or watch them take what they want and pray they don't decide you're also food. Your best defense is actually fire, but maintaining a fire in an open pasture while also watching sheep is nearly impossible during the day. At night, if you're doing overnight watch, you'll build a fire and keep it going, feeding it constantly, because wolves are cautious around fire. But during the day, you're relying on vigilance, noise, and the hope that there's easier prey elsewhere. The howl doesn't come closer, and after 10 minutes of watching the tree line with your heart hammering, you start to relax slightly. Maybe they're passing through. Maybe they've already eaten. Maybe they've learned that this particular pasture has a shepherd who's more trouble than he's worth. Though given that you've been here less than 24 hours and can barely keep sheep from drowning in ditches, that seems unlikely. But wolves aren't even your biggest predator problem. Bears exist in many parts of medieval Europe, and they absolutely will kill sheep. Unlike wolves, bears are solitary, unpredictable, and much harder to scare off. A bear doesn't care about your fire or your shouting. If a bear wants mutton, it's getting mutton, and you're getting out of the way or getting mauled. Medieval records mention shepherds being killed by bears semi-regularly, usually when they tried to defend their flocks and the bear took it personally. Then there are the human predators, and this is where things get really complicated. Sheep theft is rampant in medieval society. A single sheep is worth serious money. We're talking the equivalent of several weeks' wages for a peasant laborer. Your flock of 100 sheep represents more wealth than most people will see in their entire lives. This makes you a target. Organized sheep rustlers are a constant threat. These aren't desperate peasants stealing one sheep to feed their families, though that happens too. These are groups of thieves who coordinate attacks, sometimes armed, who will drive off dozens of sheep at once if given the opportunity. They know the land. They know when shepherds are most vulnerable, and they know that most medieval law enforcement is essentially non-existent in rural areas. You're watching the approaches to your pasture constantly now, looking for movement that isn't wildlife. That group of travelers on the distant road, are they just passing through, Or are they scouting? Those shepherds from the neighboring estate, are they actually tending their own flocks? Or are they checking to see when you're distracted? The paranoia is exhausting, but it's also necessary, because losing sheep to thieves doesn't just mean losing income. It means facing your Lord's wrath, and that can mean beatings, fines you can't afford, or worse. Medieval justice was harsh on sheep thieves. When they were caught, hanging was common, but catching them was the hard part. By the time you realize sheep are missing, the thieves are long gone. By the time you report it to any authority, the stolen sheep have been slaughtered, sold, or moved to another region. You're just out the livestock, and you'll be held responsible. There's also the problem of rival shepherds. Resources are limited. Good grazing land, water sources, shelter from storms, and territorial disputes are common. You might think you're in your designated pasture, but someone else might claim that this corner has always been part of their grazing rights. Arguments escalate quickly. Medieval court records are full of cases involving shepherds fighting over boundaries, water rights, and grazing areas. These fights sometimes got violent. Shepherds carried staffs for sheep management, yes, but also for cracking rival shepherds' skulls when necessary. You notice a shepherd from a neighboring estate moving his flock closer to your water source. This could be innocent, his sheep need water too. Or it could be a deliberation encroachment, testing to see if you'll defend your territory. You walk over to the boundary, making your presence known, and there's this moment of tension where you're both assessing each other. He's got the same rough look you've probably developed over the course of today, weathered, exhausted, suspicious. Neither of you wants a fight, but neither of you can afford to show weakness. After a long stare, he moves his flock slightly away. You've won this encounter, but there will be others. Then there are the tax collectors and manorial officials, and honestly, they're more dangerous than wolves. At least wolves just want to eat your sheep. Tax collectors want to count them, assess their value, and determine how much you or your lord owes. Medieval tax systems were Byzantine in their complexity. There were taxes on wool, taxes on sheep sold, taxes on sheep bred, fees for using common land, fees for moving sheep across territories, and tithes to the church. When officials show up, you have to stop everything and present your flock for counting. This sounds simple until you remember that counting sheep is where the whole "counting sheep to fall asleep" thing comes from, because it's mind-numbingly tedious and sheep won't stand still. The officials don't care that you're busy, that you've got sick sheep that need attention, or that moving the whole flock for their convenience will disrupt the entire day. They're here to do their job, and their job involves making your life harder. And you'd better hope your count matches their count. If there's a discrepancy, you're immediately under suspicion. Did you hide sheep to avoid taxes? Did you sell sheep without reporting? Did you falsify your earlier reports? The burden of proof is on you, and the sheep scattered and I lost count is not an acceptable excuse. Fines, penalties, investigations, all of this hanging over you because medieval bureaucracy is shockingly sophisticated when it comes to extracting resources from peasants. The church tithe is particularly galling. You're supposed to give 1/10 of your lambs, your wool, your income from sheep to the church. In theory, this supports the local parish and clergy. In practice, it's another bite out of an already thin margin. Some shepherds try to cheat the system, misreporting lamb births, claiming higher mortality rates, hiding the best fleece, but getting caught means accusations of sin and theft from God himself, which can result in public penance, fines, or excommunication. And excommunication in medieval society isn't just religious, it's social death. There's movement on the far side of the pasture, and your hand goes to your knife before you recognize the figure as a fellow shepherd from your village. He waves, and you wave back, but you don't abandon your post to chat. Trust is complicated out here. This person might be a friend, might be someone you grew up with, but he's also competition for resources. He's also someone who might report infractions to the Lord if it benefits him. Historians still argue whether medieval village communities were tight-knit and supportive or suspicious and competitive, but from where you're standing, it looks like both simultaneously. The threat landscape shifts throughout the day. Morning brings the risk of overnight predation becoming apparent, finding carcasses, tracking blood trails, discovering that wolves visited while everyone was asleep. Midday brings human threats, thieves who attack during shift changes, officials who show up unannounced, disputes with other shepherds over boundaries. Evening brings its own dangers as everyone tries to secure flocks for the night, and desperation makes people take risks they wouldn't during daylight. You're also dealing with internal threats from within your own economic system. Your lord, assuming you're working for a lord rather than freeholding, and most shepherds were bound to manorial estates, has expectations. He wants more lambs, better wool, higher profits, and he wants it all with minimal investment in flock health or shepherd welfare. If you lose too many sheep, you're incompetent. If you spend too much time treating sick sheep instead of expanding the flock, you're not ambitious enough. You can't win. The Lord's bailiff might show up at any time to inspect the flock, question your decisions, and generally make you feel like you're failing even when you're doing everything possible. These officials often know less about sheep than you do, but they have the Lord's authority, so you have to smile and nod while they suggest impossibly stupid management strategies that would destroy the flock if implemented. There's also the problem of common land disputes. Many medieval shepherds used common lands, areas that multiple people had rights to use for grazing. This system worked when everyone respected unwritten rules about overgrazing, rotation, and fair access. It broke down constantly because people are people, and tragedy of the commons isn't just a modern economics concept. Someone always pushed the boundaries, brought too many sheep, stayed too long in one area, or claimed exclusive rights to shared resources. These disputes could drag on for years, involving village councils, manorial courts, even higher authorities. In the meantime, you're trying to graze your sheep while avoiding confrontations, documenting your usage in case you need to defend yourself later, and watching your pasture quality decline because everyone's overusing it and no one's taking responsibility for maintenance. A merchant approaches in late afternoon, and your guard goes up immediately. Wool merchants are necessary. They buy your wool and connect you to markets, but they're also skilled negotiators who will absolutely exploit your lack of alternatives. You need to sell. They know you need to sell. They'll offer whatever price maximizes their profit and minimizes yours. There's no market competition out here, no price comparison shopping. You take what's offered or you don't sell, and not selling isn't really an option when you need the income. The merchant looks at your sheep with an exaggerated critical eye, pointing out every flaw. Wool quality is down. Sheep are smaller than expected. There's disease in the flock, reducing value. All of this might be true, but he's also negotiating. You know this dance, but knowing doesn't help much when you have no leverage. You'll accept his offer. He'll leave with a good deal, and you'll be back here tomorrow with slightly less economic security than you had today. Bandits are a constant background threat that occasionally becomes a foreground crisis. Medieval roads were dangerous, rural areas even more so, and groups of outlaws absolutely would attack isolated shepherds for whatever they could get. Your sheep, your knife, your boots, your clothes, all of it has value to people desperate enough. You're not important enough to warrant protection, not powerful enough to deter attack, and not wealthy enough to pay ransom if captured. Some bandits are former shepherds themselves, people who decided that stealing sheep was easier than raising them. They know exactly how shepherding works, which makes them more dangerous. They know when you're most vulnerable, where you're likely to be, what distractions to create. A fire in the distance might be innocent, or it might be a tactic to draw you away from your flock while accomplices move in. As the sun gets lower, you're preparing for the transition to evening watch, and the threat level somehow increases. Predators are more active at dusk and dawn. Thieves prefer low light for their work. Even the sheep get more unpredictable as daylight fades. You're tired. You've been on alert for over 12 hours, and you've got another whole night ahead of you before you can even think about rest. The reality you're facing is that medieval shepherding exists in a constant state of siege. You're protecting valuable assets with minimal resources against threats from every direction: animal, human, bureaucratic, economic. There's no backup coming, no security system, no insurance policy. It's just you, your staff, your increasingly questionable judgment, and a flock of sheep that still seem determined to die in creative ways despite everything you've done today. That howl from earlier comes again, closer this time, and the sheep hear it. They cluster together, skittish and wild-eyed, and you know your night is about to get much worse. Welcome to the permanent anxiety of medieval shepherding, where the question isn't whether something will try to destroy your flock, but what will try and whether you'll be able to stop it. The wool merchant who just left has reminded you of something you've been trying not to think about all day. You don't actually own these sheep. Even if you did, you don't really own the wool they produce. You don't control the prices. You don't control the market. And you definitely don't control your own economic destiny. Welcome to the medieval wool economy, where you do all the work and everyone else gets rich. Let's start with the basic structure, because it's important to understand just how trapped you are. If you're a peasant shepherd working for a lord, and statistically, you probably are, these sheep belong to your lord. You're essentially hired labor, paid either in a tiny share of the profits, some grazing rights for a few sheep of your own, or just basic subsistence. Your lord owns the flock, makes the major decisions, takes the profits, and when things go wrong, you take the blame. Even if you're one of the relatively rare free shepherds who owns your own small flock, you're still caught in a system designed to extract maximum value from your labor while giving you minimum return. The wool trade in medieval Europe is a massive, sophisticated industry, and you're at the very bottom of a very tall pyramid. Above you are layers of merchants, guild members, cloth makers, dyers, exporters, and nobles, all taking their cut before you see a single penny. The wool itself is incredibly valuable. English wool, especially if you're shepherding in England, is prized across Europe for its quality. Flemish weavers will pay premium prices for good English fleeces. Italian merchants compete for access to wool supplies. The entire economy of regions depends on wool production. But here's the cruel irony. The people producing this valuable commodity, you and your sheep, see almost none of that value. Shearing happens once a year, usually in late spring or early summer, and it's an exhausting, dangerous process that you're absolutely dreading. You have to catch each sheep individually and remember, these are not cooperative animals. Wrestle them into position and remove their entire fleece with hand shears that are basically giant scissors. Medieval shearing was done by skilled shearers who traveled from farm to farm, but you're still involved in catching, holding, and managing panicked sheep who think they're being murdered. The shearers work fast because they're paid per sheep, not per hour, which means they're not particularly careful. Sheep get cut. You get cut. Everyone's covered in wool grease, sweat, and blood by the end of the day. The fleeces are rolled and tied, weighed and graded, and then the calculations begin, calculations that somehow never work in your favor. First, the Lord takes his share. If these are his sheep, he takes everything and pays you your pittance. If you own some sheep but graze on his land, he takes a portion as rent. Then the church takes its tithe on tenth of your wool. Thank you very much. Then there are the guild regulations to contend with, and this is where things get truly Byzantine. Medieval wool guilds controlled every aspect of the trade. They set quality standards, regulated who could buy and sell, determined prices, and enforced rules with the backing of local authorities. If you wanted to sell wool, you sold it through guild-approved merchants at guild-approved times in guild-approved markets. Trying to bypass the guild system, selling directly to consumers, or to foreign merchants, or outside the official market days was illegal and could result in your wool being confiscated, fines, or worse. The guilds justified this control by claiming they maintained quality and protected the industry's reputation. In reality, they were cartels designed to maximize profits for guild members while minimizing payments to producers. You had no negotiating power. The merchant offered a price, and you took it or you didn't sell. And not selling meant your family didn't eat, so you took whatever was offered and smiled while doing it. The pricing structure was deliberately opaque. Wool was graded by quality: fine, medium, coarse, and within those categories there were subcategories based on color, length, cleanliness, and various other factors that seemed designed to confuse producers. The merchant examining your wool would find reasons to downgrade it. Too much vegetable matter, too short, inconsistent quality, colors not quite right. Every criticism reduced the price, and you had no way to verify if these criticisms were legitimate or just negotiating tactics. Some shepherds tried to prepare their wool better to get higher prices, washing the fleeces, removing debris more carefully, sorting by quality. But this required time you didn't have and resources you didn't possess. Most shepherds sold their wool, in the grease, straight off the sheep, and accepted lower prices because the alternative was spending days processing wool instead of tending sheep, which just meant more sheep died and you lost money anyway. The export market made everything worse. English wool was so valuable that kings used it as a diplomatic tool and revenue source. Export taxes, customs duties, royal monopolies. The crown took a substantial cut of wool profits through various mechanisms. Edward III famously sat on a woolsack in Parliament to symbolize England's wool wealth, which is great symbolism but didn't help you pay for your sick sheep's treatment. There were regulations about who could export wool, when, where, and how much. There were staple towns-designated ports where wool had to be sold before export. This gave merchants in those towns monopoly power, and they used it. Wool producers from across England had to transport their wool to these staple towns, paying transportation costs, storage fees, and accepting whatever prices the staple merchants offered. If you tried to smuggle wool to avoid taxes and controls, you were committing a serious crime. Wool smuggling was rampant because the profit margins made it tempting, but getting caught meant severe punishment. Your wool would be confiscated. You'd face crushing fines, possibly imprisonment. The risk-reward calculation kept most people in line, which was exactly what the system intended. Let's talk about debt, because you're probably already in debt or about to be. Medieval shepherding required capital buying sheep, maintaining them through winter, paying for treatment when they got sick, replacing losses. Most shepherds borrowed money, either from their lord, from merchants, or from money lenders. The interest rates were crushing. Usury laws theoretically limited interest, but there were creative ways around them: fees, penalties for late payment, loans structured as partnerships where the lender took a share of profits. Once you were in debt, you were trapped. You couldn't afford to negotiate better wool prices because you needed to sell immediately to make loan payments. You couldn't invest in flock improvements because every penny went to debt service. You couldn't leave shepherding because you owed money, and medieval debt was enforceable through seizure of property. Forced labor, or worse. Historians still argue whether medieval debt bondage was technically slavery, but from the debtor's perspective, the distinction was pretty academic. The monastery owns a flock near yours, and you watch their shepherd working with a mixture of envy and resentment. Monastic institutions were major wool producers in medieval Europe. They had better resources, better pastures, exemptions from certain taxes, and direct connections to international markets. Their shepherd wasn't necessarily treated better than you, but the institution behind him had advantages you could never access. Monasteries could invest in flock quality, bringing in better rams, culling aggressively without immediate financial pressure, holding wool off market until prices improved. They operated on institutional timelines, not survival timelines. If they had a bad year, the monastery absorbed the loss. If you had a bad year, your family starved. This created market distortions that worked against small producers. When monastery wool flooded the market, prices dropped. When they held back supply, prices rose, but you'd already sold at the lower price because you needed immediate cash. You couldn't compete with institutions that had resources, connections, and time horizons measured in decades rather than seasons. The cloth industry created additional exploitation layers. Your wool went to carders, spinners, weavers, fullers, dyers, each step adding value and each step controlled by different guilds with different regulations. By the time your wool became cloth, its value had increased tenfold, but you'd been paid for raw wool at the first step. All that added value went to urban craftsmen and merchants, not to the shepherd who spent a year keeping sheep alive to produce the wool in the first place. Some regions tried to develop local cloth industries to keep more value in the area. This threatened established merchant interests, and the political battles were fierce. Export bans on raw wool, import restrictions on foreign cloth, guild regulations preventing rural cloth production. The system protected existing power structures and prevented shepherds from accessing more profitable parts of the supply chain. You're learning that medieval economics operated on what we might call extractive maximization. Every level of the system was designed to extract maximum value from the level below it. The shepherd extracted value from sheep through labor. The lord extracted value from the shepherd through ownership and rent. Merchants extracted value from the lord through monopoly pricing. Guilds extracted value from merchants through fees and regulations. The crown extracted value from everyone through taxes and customs. The church extracted value from all levels through tithes and fees. The financial calculations were deliberately complex. You were never quite sure how much you should be making, how much was fair, whether you were being cheated or just experiencing normal market conditions. This uncertainty was a feature, not a bug. Keeping producers confused and slightly desperate meant they accepted whatever terms were offered and didn't organize to demand better treatment. Sheep prices fluctuated based on factors you couldn't predict or control. Disease outbreaks in other regions affected supply. Wars disrupted trade routes. Noble marriages changed political alliances and trade agreements. Weather in Flanders affected demand for English wool. You were supposed to respond to these market signals, but you found out about them months late, through rumors, after you'd already made decisions based on outdated information. The manorial system added another exploitation layer. If you worked on a manor, you had obligations, labor days you owed the Lord, crops you had to grow on his land, fees for using the mill or the bread oven. Shepherding didn't exempt you from these obligations. You were still expected to show up for harvest, for plowing, for whatever labor the manor required. Your sheep might need attention, but the Lord's wheat needed harvesting, and guess which took priority? Some shepherds were actually serfs legally bound to the land, unable to leave without permission, obligated to provide labor and payments to their lord. Serfdom varied by region and period, but where it existed, it meant you couldn't even escape bad situations. You were born into shepherding, you'd die in shepherding, and your children would be shepherds too unless they somehow bought their freedom, which required money you'd never have. The rising sun is now setting, and you're calculating in your head how much today cost you. Lost sheep reduce the flock value. Sick sheep require treatment you can't afford. Time spent on emergencies is time not spent on preventive care. The wool merchant's offer was lower than last year. Your debt payment is coming due. The math doesn't work. It never works. You need the flock to grow faster, the sheep to stay healthier, the wool prices to rise, or your expenses to decrease. None of those things are under your control. There's a reason medieval shepherds had reputations for being sullen, suspicious, and occasionally prone to theft or poaching. The system was rigged against them so thoroughly that playing by the rules meant slow starvation. Some shepherds cheated underreporting births, hiding sheep, selling wool under the table, stealing from their lords. The moral calculus was simple. The system was stealing from them, so stealing back was justice, not crime, but getting caught meant disaster. Punishments for theft from a lord were severe beatings, mutilation, hanging. Even accusations without proof could destroy your reputation and livelihood. So you stayed trapped in the system, hating it, unable to escape it, watching wealth flow up the economic ladder while you remained at the bottom, doing the hardest work for the smallest reward. The wool on your own clothes because yes, you're wearing wool. Everyone represents hours of sheep management, shearing, processing, and yet somehow you can't afford good quality wool clothing. You're wearing coarse wool, the stuff that couldn't be sold for premium prices, scratchy and uncomfortable and a daily reminder of your position in the economic hierarchy. As darkness approaches, you're not just watching for wolves. You're thinking about the merchant who'll return next season with another insulting offer. You're thinking about the debt payment due next month. You're thinking about your Lord's expectations and the guild's regulations and the church's demands and the endless extraction of value from your labor. The sheep might be the immediate threat to your survival, but the economic system is the long-term trap that ensures you'll never escape this pasture, never improve your situation, never be anything more than a producer of wealth for others. Welcome to the medieval wool economy, where fleece is gold and shepherds are disposable. The temperature is dropping fast as the sun disappears below the horizon, and you're suddenly aware of just how inadequate your shelter situation is. You've been so focused on the sheep all day that you haven't thought much about where you're actually going to sleep tonight. Now, as the wind picks up and the first drops of rain start falling, you're realizing that shelter is a generous term for what you've got. Your accommodations are a shepherd's hut on the edge of the pasture, and calling it a hut is being charitable. It's basically a hole in the ground with walls. The construction is simple. Dig a shallow pit, build up stone or turf walls about 4 feet high, lay wooden beams across the top, cover with turf or thatch, hope it doesn't collapse. There's no foundation, no mortar in many cases, just stones stacked and wedged, with gaps stuffed with moss or mud. You duck inside as the rain intensifies, and the reality of your living situation hits you immediately. The ceiling is so low you can't stand upright, you're hunched over, moving in a crouch that's going to destroy your back over time. The space is maybe 8 feet by 6 feet, and it's already occupied by your bedding, a pile of straw and a rough woolen blanket. Your few possessions, a wooden bowl, a spare shirt, your shearing tools, and approximately 10 million insects. The floor is dirt, not packed earth, not clay tiles, just dirt. When it rains, water seeps through the turf roof, runs down the walls, and turns the floor into mud. You're standing in that mud now, feeling it squelch around your wrapped feet, knowing that everything you own is about to get damp and stay damp for days because there's no way to dry anything in this environment. Light comes from a small opening in the wall that serves as both window and ventilation. There's no glass, obviously. In winter, you'll stuff it with straw to keep wind out, which means you'll be living in complete darkness except for whatever rushlight or candle you can afford, which is basically none. For now, the opening lets in enough twilight to see by, and also lets in rain, wind, and any insects or small animals that want to visit. The smell inside is intensely a combination of wet earth, mildew, human body odor, sheep smell that's permeated everything you own, and something else you can't quite identify but definitely indicates something died in here at some point. There's no chimney, so if you light a fire for warmth, the smoke just fills the space until you're coughing and crying and have to choose between freezing or asphyxiation. Your bed is where you spread straw on the ground and cover it with your blanket. The straw is already moldy, you can see the black spots and smell the decay. Sleeping on moldy straw causes respiratory problems, but fresh straw costs money or requires time to gather, and you have neither. The blanket is wool, worn thin in places, never washed because washing requires resources you don't have. It's stiff with dried sweat and probably contains more livestock than fabric at this point. Medieval sources mention shepherds suffering from various respiratory ailments, and you're beginning to understand why. You're breathing in mold spores, smoke from cooking fires, dust from straw, and whatever bacteria are growing in the perpetually damp environment. Your lungs are going to be permanently damaged if you survive long enough for that to matter. The rain is coming down harder now, and the roof is leaking in 3 places. You try to position your bedding away from the drips, but the space is so small that everywhere is either under a leak or in the puddle forming from the leaks. You give up and just accept that you're going to sleep wet. Again. Because it rains constantly in medieval England, or at least it feels that way, and your shelter is only marginally better than sleeping outside. There's no bathroom, no latrine, nothing. You go outside to relieve yourself, rain or not, in a designated spot that's becoming increasingly foul. In winter, you'll use a pot inside because going out in a blizzard risks death. And then you'll have to empty that pot in the morning, adding one more disgusting task to your daily routine. The whole situation is medieval sanitation at its finest, which is to say, completely awful. You're hungry, so you pull out your food supplies. You've got hard bread so hard it could be used as a weaponsome cheese that's more mold than cheese at this point, an onion, and a bit of dried meat that might be lamb or might be rat. Honestly, it's hard to tell. There's no table, no chair, no plates. You sit on the ground in the mud, tear off a chunk of bread with your teeth, and try to soften it with some water from the leather flask you filled at the stream earlier. The water tastes like leather and possibly contains parasites, but you drink it anyway because what choice do you have? Clean water is a luxury. The stream might be contaminated with runoff from upstream farms, animal waste, or just natural bacteria, but it's water and you need it. You'll deal with the dysentery if it happens. Historians still argue whether medieval people had stronger immune systems or just higher mortality rates. But you're about to become a data point in that debate. Cooking is theoretically possible if you build a fire, but that requires dry wood, which doesn't exist right now, and time, which you don't have, and the willingness to fill your tiny shelter with smoke. Most days you eat cold food, bread, cheese, whatever vegetables you can scavenge, occasionally some meat if you're lucky. It's not cuisine, it's fuel. You eat to survive, not because anything tastes good. The wind is howling now, and you can feel it coming through gaps in the walls. Medieval insulation consisted of hope the walls block most of the wind, and your walls are not succeeding. The temperature inside is maybe 5 degrees warmer than outside, which means you're still freezing. You wrap yourself in your damp blanket, lie down on your moldy straw, and try to find a position that doesn't leave you lying in a puddle. Sleep is not restful in these conditions. You're cold, you're wet, you're uncomfortable, and you're hyper-aware of the sheep outside. Every sound makes you alertist that wolves, thieves, a sheep in distress. You drift into light sleep and snap awake repeatedly, never achieving the deep rest your exhausted body needs. This is your every night. Chronic sleep deprivation becomes your baseline state. Summer isn't better, just different problems. The hut becomes an oven, trapping heat and making the air inside thick and suffocating. Insects breed in the thatch and the walls, beetles, spiders, centipedes, and various flying biters. You wake up covered in insect bites, sometimes with things crawling on you. There's no screens, no insect repellent, no escape. You just endure. The isolation gets to you, especially during long nights. You're alone out here with your thoughts, and your thoughts are not good company. You think about how you ended up in this situation. You think about how there's no escape. You think about how you'll probably die doing this from exposure, from disease, from an accident, from violence, and no one will particularly care or remember. Some shepherds carved messages into their huts or into stones, names, dates, prayers, complaints. Archaeologists have found these occasionally, and they're heartbreaking. John was here. 1347. God help me. May next year be better. I hate sheep. These tiny cries from the past. From people trapped in the same situation you're in now. Desperate to leave some mark proving they existed. Weather is your constant enemy. Rain makes everything miserable. Wet clothes never dry. Wet bedding never dries. Mud is everywhere. And sheep get sick in wet conditions, which means more work for you. Snow is worse because it can literally kill you. Medieval shepherds froze to death regularly when caught in unexpected storms or when their inadequate shelter failed during blizzards. Floods are a serious risk if your pasture is near a stream or river. Medieval drainage was poor to non-existent, so heavy rains turned fields into swamps, and rivers overflowed their banks without warning. Shepherds drowned trying to save their flocks. Huts were washed away. Entire seasons' work destroyed in a single storm. Summer droughts brought different disasters. Streams dried up, forcing you to travel farther for water. Pasture quality declined, meaning sheep got less nutrition and more disease. The risk of fire increased. One lightning strike and the dry grass would ignite, potentially killing your entire flock if they couldn't escape fast enough. You had no way to fight fires. You just watched and hoped the wind shifted. The hut itself requires constant maintenance. The turf roof degrades over time, especially when it rains frequently. You have to patch holes, replace sections, reinforce weak spots. The walls settle and develop gaps. Stones come loose. The whole structure is slowly collapsing, and you're in a perpetual race to repair it faster than it deteriorates. In really bad weather, the hut becomes actively dangerous. High winds can tear off the roof, sending turf and wooden beams flying. Heavy snow can cause the roof to collapse, potentially crushing you if you're inside. You've heard stories of shepherds dying in their huts, either from structural collapse or from being trapped inside during severe weather. Your possessions are limited because there's no room and no security. Anything valuable gets stolen if you leave it unattended. You keep your knife with you always because it's too valuable to lose. Your spare clothing, assuming you have any, stays in the hut and slowly rots from the damp. Your tools are stored outside under a lean-to that provides minimal protection. The psychological toll of living in these conditions is severe. You're constantly uncomfortable, never clean, always either too cold or too hot, perpetually damp, surrounded by filth. There's no privacy, no comfort, no respite. This isn't camping for a weekend, this is your life. Indefinitely, with no vacation, no breaks, no improvement on the horizon. Medieval sources occasionally mention shepherds going mad from isolation and hardship. They'd be found wandering, talking to themselves, or just sitting staring at nothing. Whether this was mental illness, stress breakdown, or neurological damage from malnutrition and disease, the result was the same: a broken person who could no longer function. There was no treatment, no support, no disability benefits. You just broke, and then you died. Probably. The class divide is never more apparent than in shelter quality. Your lord lives in a stone manor house with multiple rooms, fireplaces, proper roofs, glass windows if he's wealthy enough. Merchants live in timber-framed houses in towns with second floors and furniture. Even better-off peasants have cottage with real doors and chimneys. You have a hole in the ground. This isn't about lazy construction or lack of knowledge. It's about economics. Building a proper shelter requires resources: cut timber, shaped stone, iron nails, skilled labor. You have none of these things. You build with what's freely available: dirt, wild stone, found wooden. You build it yourself because you can't afford to pay anyone. The result is shelter that barely deserves the name. The rain finally lets up slightly, and you venture outside to check on the sheep. They're miserable, huddled together in the lee of a stone wall, wool-soaked and heavy. You'll need to watch for hypothermia in the lambs, for hoof problems from standing in mud, for respiratory issues from the damp. The rain has just created a dozen new problems that you'll deal with tomorrow. Assuming you survive tonight, you go back inside, lie down on your wet straw, pull your damp blanket around you, and try to ignore the water dripping through the roof onto your face. This is home. This is your castle. This is the best shelter you're going to get in medieval shepherding, and it's slowly killing you through a combination of exposure, disease, and the psychological weight of living in squalor. Welcome to medieval housing for the working poor, where the elements are always winning and you're just trying not to die before spring. Morning comes too early, and you're awakened not by the sun but by the sound of a sheep in obvious distress. It's a different kind of bleating, high-pitched, panicked, sustained, and you know immediately that something's very wrong. You stumble out of your hut, still half asleep, and find one of your ewes lying on her side, bloated like a balloon, breathing rapidly and shallow. She's dying, and you have maybe minutes to save her if you can figure out what's wrong and if you have any treatment that might work. This is medieval veterinary medicine, and you're about to discover that it's less medicine and more desperate guessing combined with folk remedies that probably make things worse. You have no formal training, no medical knowledge beyond what other shepherds have told you, no diagnostic tools, and treatments that range from might work to definitely harmful with very little in between. The bloated ewe is experiencing what's probably ruminal tympanitis buildup in the stomach that can't be released. In modern veterinary medicine, this is treated with a stomach tube or, in emergencies, by puncturing the rumen to release gas. You have neither the knowledge nor the tools for proper treatment. What you have is a sharp knife, terror, and advice from an old shepherd who once told you that stabbing them in the left side sometimes helps. So you're faced with a decision. Do nothing and watch the sheep die for certain, or attempt an emergency procedure that might save her or might kill her faster. You choose action because doing nothing feels worse. You position the knife against her left flank, trying to remember exactly where the old shepherd said to insert it, and you push. Blood wells up, there's a hissing sound as gas escapes, and the ewe thrashes. You hold the wound open, letting more gas out, praying this works. The ewe's breathing eases slightly. The bloating reduces. She's still in bad shape, but she might survive. You've just performed emergency field surgery with a dirty knife and no anesthetic, and you have no idea if you've done more harm than good. You pack the wound with some herbs you think might prevent infection based on what? You're not sure. Just things people say, and move on to check the rest of the flock because you don't have time to monitor one sheep when you've got 100 others. Medieval sheep medicine was a fascinating combination of practical observation, folk belief, religious ritual, and complete nonsense. Some treatments were based on genuine observation. Shepherds noticed that certain herbs reduced inflammation, that keeping wounds clean helped healing, that isolating sick sheep prevented disease spread. Other treatments were based on humoral theory, astrology, and sympathetic magic, and these treatments ranged from useless to actively deadly. The dominant medical theory was that disease resulted from imbalances in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Animals, like humans, could have excess or deficiency of these humors, and treatment involved restoring balance. This sounds reasonable until you see what restoring balance actually meant in practice. Bloodletting, purging, inducing vomiting, and various procedures designed to expel bad humors. Bloodletting was common for sheep as for humans. A sheep acting lethargic? Too much blood time to bleed it. You'd cut a vein, usually in the ear or under the tail, and let blood drain into a bowl until you decided enough had come out. The theory was that this released excess blood and restored balance. The reality was that you were weakening already sick animals, making them more susceptible to secondary infections and less able to fight off disease. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from ancient times? Medieval sheep medicine had equivalents. Manure featured prominently in treatments: cow dung poultices for wounds, horse manure mixed with wine for digestive issues, sheep dung burned and the ashes mixed with oil for skin conditions. Whether any of this worked or whether it just introduced more bacteria into already compromised animals is an open question. Historians still argue whether some folk remedies had genuine antimicrobial properties or whether the occasional success was just luck. Respiratory diseases were common and feared. Lungworm, pneumonia, various respiratory infections could sweep through a flock and kill dozens of sheep. Your treatment options were prayer, mainly, but also some creative interventions. One remedy involved blowing tobacco smoke up the sheep's nostrils to clear the lungs. Another involved making the sheep inhale steam from boiling herbs. A third involved bloodletting from the ear because somehow that was supposed to help breathing. Foot rot, which you've already encountered, had dozens of proposed treatments. Vinegar and salt, which might actually help as a mild antiseptic. Burning the affected tissue with a hot iron, which definitely caused more damage. Prayers to Saint Wendelin while applying a poultice made from spider webs, honey, and crushed snails, which combined potentially useful ingredients. Honey has antimicrobial properties, with complete superstition. You tried everything because when a quarter of your flock has foot rot, you get desperate. Parasites were treated with purgative substances designed to expel worms through violent diarrhea. You'd force-feed sheep mixtures of bitter herbs, tobacco, even small amounts of toxic plants, hoping to kill the parasites without killing the host. The dosing was pure guesswork. Too little and it didn't work. Too much and you poisoned your sheep. You aimed for the middle and hoped. External parasites like lice and mites were treated with various washes and applications. Sulfur mixed with fat and rubbed into the wool was common and probably somewhat effective. Mercury compounds were also used, which definitely killed parasites but also poisoned sheep and humans handling them. You'd spend hours coating sheep in these toxic mixtures, breathing the fumes, getting it on your skin, slowly poisoning yourself while trying to cure your flock. Lambing complications were particularly terrifying because they required physical intervention and you had no training. A breached lamb coming out backward or sideways meant you had to reach inside the ewe and try to reposition it. You're doing this with no gloves, no lubricant except maybe some animal fat, no knowledge of anatomy beyond basic feel. Your hands are large and rough. The birth canal is narrow. The ewe is in agony and fighting you, and you're trying to find tiny hooves in the dark by touch and pull them into the correct position. If you can't reposition the lamb, both the lamb and the ewe will probably die. Medieval sources mention embryotomy, cutting up the dead lamb inside the mother to remove it piece by piece and save the ewe. This required special hooks and knives, skill you didn't have, and a strong stomach. More often, You just lost both animals and moved on. Milk fever, a calcium deficiency that hit you shortly after lambing made sheep unable to stand, with tremors and eventual death. The cause wasn't understood in medieval times. Treatments included bloodletting, wrong, feeding various herbs, maybe helped slightly, and prayer, made you feel better but didn't save the sheep. Modern treatment is calcium injection, which would have seemed like magic to a medieval shepherd. Poisoning was constant worry. Pastures contained toxic plants, foxglove, hemlock, ragwort, bracken. You and sheep would eat them either because they were stupid or because they were mineral deficient and craved the plants despite toxicity. You tried to learn which plants were dangerous and clear them from pastures, but you missed some, misidentified others, and sheep found new ways to poison themselves. Treatment for poisoning was purging, making the sheep vomit, or inducing diarrhea to expel the toxin. You'd force feed them salt water, or oils, or various herbal concoctions designed to make them violently ill. Sometimes this worked if you caught it early. More often, you just made the sheep's final hours more miserable before they died anyway. Wounds and injuries were common: bites from predators, gashes from thorns, broken bones from falls, horn injuries from fights. Your first aid kit consisted of spider webs, which actually do help stop bleeding, honey, genuine antimicrobial properties, various herbs, some useful, some not, prayers, psychologically comforting, and cauterization with hot iron, prevents infection but causes severe pain and tissue damage. For broken bones, you could try splinting, binding straight sticks to the leg and hoping it healed correctly. Success rate was low. Most sheep with broken legs were slaughtered because keeping them alive long enough to heal required resources you didn't have. A sheep that can't walk, can't graze, needs hand feeding, needs protection from the flock, needs constant monitoring. It was often more economical to cut your losses. Infections were death sentences more often than not. Once a wound became infected, red, swollen, producing pus, spreading red streaks, you had very few options. Clean it repeatedly with water or vinegar. Apply honey or herb poultices. Maybe try cauterization to burn out infected tissue. And pray. Antibiotics wouldn't exist for centuries. Most serious infections led to sepsis and death, and you watched helplessly as sheep declined over days. The religious aspect of medieval medicine can't be ignored. Many treatments were accompanied by prayers or charms. You'd recite prayers to specific saints while administering remedies, believing that divine intervention was as important as physical treatment. Was this superstition or practical psychology? Maybe both. If you believed a treatment would work, you administered it more confidently, which might have affected outcomes. Or maybe it was just desperate people trying anything that might help. Astrological timing was considered important. Certain procedures were supposed to be done during specific moon phases or when particular stars were visible. Bloodletting on the wrong day was thought to be ineffective or harmful. Breeding should happen when celestial signs were favorable. Whether this had any real effect or was pure superstition, you followed it because going against tradition felt risky. Some shepherds consulted with wise women or cunning folk, local people with reputations for healing knowledge. They'd provide herbal remedies, charms, rituals, and advice that was sometimes helpful and sometimes completely useless. You paid them with cheese or wool or labor because desperate people pay for hope even when results are uncertain. The absence of diagnostic knowledge meant you treated symptoms without understanding causes. Diarrhea got the same treatment regardless of whether it was caused by parasites, bacteria, poisoning, or dietary issues. Respiratory problems got the same interventions whether they were viral, bacterial, parasitic, or environmental. You threw treatments at problems and hoped something worked. Record keeping was minimal to non-existent. You couldn't track which treatments worked because you didn't have writing materials or education. Knowledge was passed orally, which meant it was distorted, mixed with superstition, and hard to verify. One shepherd swore that feeding sheep bread soaked in beer cured coughing. Did it? Maybe sometimes, maybe never, but the story persisted. The ewe you stabbed earlier is still alive, though she's not moving much. You've probably saved her in the short term, but you've also created an open wound that could become infected. You'll need to monitor her constantly, keep flies away, clean the wound, and hope her immune system can handle the rest. Or she'll die of infection next week, and you'll have just prolonged her suffering. Another sheep has bacterial infection causing discharge, swelling, and potentially blindness. Your treatment is washing the eye with water and hoping it clears up. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the infection spreads to the brain and kills the sheep. You can't predict which outcome, can't do much to influence it, just wait and see. The pharmaceutical industry was centuries away. The scientific method didn't exist. Germ theory hadn't been discovered. You're operating in an intellectual framework where disease is caused by bad humors, evil spirits, planetary alignments, or divine punishment. Your treatments reflect this framework theory designed to restore balance, drive out evil, or appease higher powers, not to target specific pathogens or physiological processes. And yet, sometimes animals survived. Whether this was because of treatment, despite treatment, or independent of treatment, you'd never know. The survivors became evidence that your methods worked. The dead were forgotten or blamed on fate. This confirmation bias kept ineffective treatments in circulation for generations. You're exhausted from the emergency, from constantly making life and death decisions with inadequate knowledge, from watching animals suffer and being unable to help effectively. Medieval shepherding isn't just physically demanding, it's emotionally crushing when you care about the animals but can't save them from disease, injury, and the fundamental absence of real veterinary medicine. Welcome to the shepherd's medical nightmare, where good intentions meet medieval ignorance and animals pay the price. It's been 3 weeks, no, let's pretend you've somehow survived that long and you're starting to notice changes in yourself that have nothing to do with physical exhaustion. You're talking to the sheep, not just commands or frustrated curses, but actual conversations. You asked the ram his opinion on the weather this morning. You apologized to a ewe for stepping near her lamb. You've named 17 sheep even though you know you shouldn't because naming them makes it harder when they die. The isolation is doing things to your mind that you didn't anticipate. Medieval shepherding meant spending days, sometimes weeks, alone on hillsides with only sheep for company. There were no podcasts to listen to, no phones to check, no social media to scroll. Just you, the wind, the sheep, and an ever-expanding void where human connection used to be. Humans are social creatures, and you're violating that fundamental need every single day. Other shepherds are out there. You can see distant figures on far hillsides sometimes, but you rarely interact. Shepherding requires constant vigilance. You can't abandon your flock for a chat. On the rare occasions when two shepherds pass close enough to speak, the conversations are brief, transactional, and oddly stilted. You've forgotten how to do small talk. When you open your mouth to speak to another human, the words come out wrong. Your voice sounds strange to your own ears, and you end up just nodding and moving on. The village is only 2 miles away, but it might as well be on another continent. You can't leave the sheep unattended long enough to visit. Even when you rotate back to the village for supplies or obligations, you're different from the other villagers. You smell wrong. You act wrong. You've been alone so long that being around people feels overwhelming and hostile. Children mock you. Adults avoid you. You're becoming the stereotype of the weird shepherd who can't function in normal society. Medieval sources are full of references to shepherds being strange, antisocial, unreliable, and slightly untrustworthy. This wasn't because shepherding attracted odd people, though it probably did. Somewhat, but because shepherding created odd people. The isolation, the constant stress, the lack of normal human interaction fundamentally changed personalities and behaviors. You're experiencing this transformation in real time. The folklore and superstitions are becoming more real to you. Initially, you dismissed the stories other shepherds told, tales of fairies in the hills, spirits that led sheep astray, magical herbs that protected flocks, curses that caused disease, superstitious nonsense, you thought. But after weeks alone with your thoughts, with nothing but sheep and landscape and the sounds of wind and wildlife, the rational certainty starts cracking. You see things at twilight, movement at the edge of vision that disappears when you look directly, shapes in the mist that might be rocks or might be something else. You hear sounds not quite voices, not quite wind that seem to be calling from the forest. Your rational mind knows these are tricks of perception, fatigue, and isolation, but there's another part of your mind, growing stronger in the absence of human contact, that's less sure. The sheep sense things you can't see. They stare at empty spaces and back away. They refuse to graze in certain areas for no apparent reason. They panic at nothing visible. Are they stupid? Are they sensing predators you haven't noticed? Or are they seeing the things that the folklore talks about? You don't believe in fairies and spirits. Except, you're starting to. Just a little. Just enough to make you uneasy. There's a spot in your pasture where sheep won't go. It's good grass, well watered, no obvious hazards. But the sheep avoid it instinctively, walking around it, refusing to be driven through it. Old shepherds told you some places are just wrong, that animals know things humans don't. You laughed at the time. Now you avoid that spot too, because standing near it makes your skin crawl and you don't know why. Medieval Christianity coexisted with older beliefs, creating a complex spiritual landscape where official religion mixed with folk practices. Shepherds blessed their flocks with holy water, but also carved protective symbols into their staffs. They prayed to saints but also left offerings at old standing stones. You're doing this too now. You said a Christian prayer this morning, then poured some milk at the base of an ancient oak tree because someone once told you it appeased the land spirits. You don't know what you believe anymore. The nights are when things get really strange. You're alone in your hut, exhausted but unable to sleep properly, and your mind plays tricks. You hear voices outside clear conversations, laughter, arguments, but when you investigate, there's nothing, just wind and darkness. This happens repeatedly. Are you hallucinating, dreaming while partially awake? Or are there actually things out there that don't want to be seen? Sleep deprivation is a factor. You're averaging maybe 4 hours of broken sleep per night. never entering deep restorative sleep because you're always half listening for threats. Chronic sleep deprivation causes hallucinations, paranoia, cognitive impairment, and emotional instability. You're experiencing all of these, but you can't stop because the sheep won't watch themselves. Some shepherds had reputations as seers or prophets. People came to them for predictions, for interpretations of dreams, for wisdom. This wasn't because shepherds had special powers, but because isolation and sensory deprivation put them in altered mental states where they seemed to perceive things others didn't. You understand this now. You've been staring at landscapes for so long that you see patterns in everything. You read meaning into the flight of birds, the behavior of sheep, the shape of clouds. Whether these perceptions mean anything or you're just going crazy, you genuinely can't tell. The seasonal festivals and religious holidays barely penetrate your isolation. You know Christmas happened because someone mentioned it when you went to the village for supplies. You weren't celebrating, you were watching sheep in freezing rain. Easter passed similarly. The holy days that structure everyone else's year are just days to you. The sheep don't care about religious calendars. Neither do wolves or weather or disease. This disconnection from normal time and social rhythms is profoundly disorienting. You lose track of days. Weeks blur together. You mark time by seasons and sheep cycle shearing time, lambing time, selling time not by human celebrations or shared cultural moments. You're drifting away from human society even when you're physically near it. The village views you with suspicion now. Shepherds were often suspected of witchcraft or dealing with dark powers. Why? Because you were alone in wild places, because you acted strangely, because you knew things about herbs and animals, because you existed outside normal social structures. When something went wrong, crop failures, illness, bad weather, it was easy to blame the weird shepherd on the hillside who talked to sheep and avoided church. You haven't done anything wrong, but the accusations would stick if someone decided to make them. Medieval witch hunts often targeted marginal people, the poor, the isolated, the strange. Shepherds fit that profile perfectly. You're starting to understand the paranoia that some shepherds felt, the need to be careful about what you say and do, the awareness that you're one accusation away from disaster. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed in magic and supernatural threats or whether these beliefs were more metaphorical. From your position, it doesn't matter. Belief and reality are blurring. You believe in sheep and grass and weather. You also, increasingly, believe in things you can't see but feel watching from the forest edges. The loneliness is physical. It's an ache in your chest, a weight on your shoulders, a hunger that food doesn't satisfy. Humans need touch, conversation, connection, and you're getting none of these things. The sheep aren't substitutes. They're not companions. They're work. The isolation is slowly hollowing you out, creating emotional voids that you fill with superstition, paranoia, and conversations with animals that don't talk back. Some shepherds broke completely. They'd be found wandering, incoherent, unable to remember their own names. They'd be committed to monasteries for care, or locked away, or just left to wander until they died. There was no psychiatric care, no understanding of mental health, no framework for treating people who'd been broken by isolation and stress. Others adapted by retreating fully into their own minds, becoming hermits who preferred solitude to human company. They'd actively avoid people, speak in monosyllables when forced to interact, and spend years on remote hillsides without complaint. Whether this was healthy adaptation or mental illness was never clear. Maybe both. Maybe the distinction didn't matter in a world where your choices were adapt or die. You're developing little rituals to maintain sanity. You count sheep obsessively not for sleep, but for control. You arrange stones in patterns that mean something only to you. You tell stories to yourself, elaborate narratives that pass the time. You sing, even though you can't carry a tune, because hearing a human voice, even your own, breaks the silence. These rituals are thin threads keeping you connected to humanity. The dreams are vivid and strange when you finally do sleep. You dream you're a sheep, or that sheep are people, or that you're in the village but can't speak and everyone's talking about you. You dream of wolves with human faces, of endless pastures where every sheep is dead, of drowning in wool. These dreams linger into waking hours, making reality feel unstable. You're forgetting things, basic information about yourself, about your family, about life before shepherding. The memories are there but distant, like they happened to someone else. Your entire existence is narrowing to this: sheep, grass, weather, threats, survival. Everything else is fading. The other shepherds you occasionally see look similar to how you probably look: weathered, suspicious, remote. There's a recognition when your eyes meet. You're all going through the same thing, slowly becoming creatures of the hills rather than members of human society. Some have been doing this for decades. You can see it in their faces, the humanity worn down to a hard, distant core. When you do interact with villagers, they treat you like you're slightly dangerous or possibly cursed. They don't make eye contact. They don't invite you to sit. They conduct their business with you quickly and send you back to your sheep. You're useful but unwelcome, necessary but undesirable. The social rejection is another layer of isolation, pushing you further into the solitary world of shepherding. The madness, if that's what this is, progresses gradually. You don't wake up crazy one day. Instead, you slowly notice that normal thoughts are mixed with strange ones, that rational assessments are competing with superstitious fears, that you're having difficulty distinguishing between what's real and what's your mind filling in gaps with imagination or fear. By the time you realize you've changed fundamentally, it's too late to stop the process. The isolation has rewired your brain. You're a shepherd now, not a person who shepherds. The distinction matters. You've been absorbed into the role, lost yourself in it, become something that fits the demands of solitary shepherding but doesn't fit anywhere else. Welcome to the psychological breakdown of medieval shepherding, where months alone on hillsides drive you to folklore, fairies, and madness, and where the village suspects you're a witch because you've stopped being quite human. It's late March now, and you've been dreading this moment since you started. Lambing season has arrived, and with it comes the closest thing to hell that medieval shepherding offers. The ewes are giving birth, and for the next 6 to 8 weeks, you're not going to sleep more than an hour at a time. You're going to witness more death than you thought possible. You're going to make impossible decisions about which animals to save and which to let die. And you're going to do all of this in freezing temperatures, often at night, with minimal light and no backup. Sheep pregnancy lasts about 5 months, which means most use lamb in early spring, March, April, depending on when they were bred. This timing is simultaneously optimal and catastrophic. Spring means grass is starting to grow, providing nutrition for nursing mothers. It also means unpredictable weather, freezing nights, rain, and conditions that kill newborn lambs within hours of birth. The first ewe goes into labor just after midnight. You notice her separating from the flock, pawing at the ground, looking uncomfortable. This is normal pre-labor behavior. You watch her from a distance, hoping for an easy birth, knowing that complications are common. Sheep have been giving birth for thousands of years without human help. But domestication has created problems. Selective breeding for wool and meat production has made births more difficult. Lambs are sometimes too large. Ewes sometimes lack strong maternal instincts. She lies down, strains, and you see the amniotic sac appearing. Good sign the lamb is coming. Then you see feet, and you count 1, 2. Also good. The feet should appear first in a normal birth, followed by the nose, then the rest of the lamb. But time passes and nothing else emerges. The ewe is straining hard, clearly in distress, and the lamb isn't progressing. You're going to have to intervene. You wash your hands in the bucket of cold water you've kept near for exactly this situation. It's not sterile. Nothing is sterile in your world, but it's something. You approach the ewe, who eyes you with fear and exhaustion. She doesn't want you near her, but she's too weak to run. You kneel in the mud and straw, position yourself behind her, and reach inside. The sensation is immediately disturbing. It's hot, slippery, tight, and you're trying to find body parts by feel in the dark inside another creature's body. Your arm is inside up to the elbow, and you're searching for the lamb's head. The ewe is contracting around your arm, making everything harder. You find the head. It's turned back, which is why the lamb is stuck. You need to reposition it forward so the nose can come through with the feet. This is delicate work requiring sensitivity and knowledge you don't really have. You're trying to cup the lamb's jaw and ease it forward without breaking anything, without tearing the ewe internally, without causing more trauma than you're preventing. The ewe is bleeding in pain. Your shoulder is screaming from the angle. Your fingers are cramping. You're sweating despite the cold. Finally, you feel the head slip into position. You withdraw your arm, and within minutes the ewe delivers first the head and feet, then the shoulders, then the rest slides out in a rush of fluid and membrane. The lamb lies there motionless, covered in birth material, and for a horrible moment you think it's dead. Then it gasps, shudders, and starts breathing. You've saved one. You clear mucus from its nose and mouth, rub it vigorously with straw to stimulate breathing and circulation, and drag it around to the mother's face so she can smell it and start bonding. She sniffs it cautiously, then begins licking it clean. Good. Maternal instinct is kicking in. This lamb might survive. But there's no time to celebrate because another ewe is showing signs of labor, and across the field, you hear the distinctive bleating of a newborn in distress. You leave the first ewe and sprint toward the sound. You find a lamb lying alone, still wet, shivering violently. It's premature or undersized, definitely under 4 pounds, and it's losing heat fast. The mother is nowhere in sight. Newborn lambs have almost no ability to regulate their body temperature. They need to nurse within the first hour to get colostrum, antibody-rich first milk that provides immune protection. They need to stay warm or they develop hypothermia and die. This lamb has neither food nor warmth, and you're now responsible for keeping it alive. You scoop it it's alarmingly light, fragile as glass, and tuck it inside your shirt against your body heat. It's covered in birth fluid that's now soaking into your clothing, but this is the fastest way to warm it. You're searching for the mother, calling out, and finally locate her 20 yards away. She's delivered a second lamb and is focused entirely on that one, completely ignoring the first. This is twin rejection, and it's heartbreakingly common. The mother can't or won't care for both lambs, so she chooses one and abandons the other. Sometimes it's because she lacks milk for two. Sometimes it's instinct telling her one lamb is weaker and she should invest resources in the stronger one. Sometimes there's no apparent reason, she just decides she's only mothering one lamb today. You try to reunite them. You hold the rejected lamb near the mother's udder, trying to get it to nurse. The ewe kicks you. She walks away. She's actively rejecting this lamb, and nothing you do changes her mind. You're now the owner of an orphan lamb that needs feeding every 2 hours, round the clock, or it dies. Your options for feeding orphan lambs are limited and bad. Ideally, you'd have fresh ewe's milk or access to another ewe who just lost her lamb and might adopt this one. You have neither. What you have is cow's milk, which isn't nutritionally appropriate for lambs, and goat's milk if you can trade for it. You'll need to warm the milk. Pour it into a makeshift bottle, maybe a sheep's stomach tied at one end, and try to get the lamb to drink. This sounds manageable until you realize you've got 5 more ewes showing signs of labor. The sun isn't up yet. It's starting to rain, and you're already exhausted. Lambing season is a marathon of crisis management where every animal needs attention simultaneously, and you can only be in one place at a time. Another ewe delivers twins without problem, small miracle. But one of the lambs is struggling to stand. Keeps trying and collapsing. Neurological problem, probably from birth trauma or oxygen deprivation. It manages to get to the udder and nurse, which is good, but it's not going to be a strong lamb. You mark it mentally as high risk. Twin number 3, you goes into labor and delivers one lamb quickly. Too quickly. The lamb hits the ground hard. Doesn't move. Doesn't breathe. Stillbirth. The ewe sniffs it, nuzzles it, tries to get it to respond, and when it doesn't, she just moves on. No prolonged grieving, no distress, just biological pragmatism. The lamb is dead, therefore no longer her concern. You check for a second lamb, sometimes there's a twin, sometimes triplets, but find nothing. She's done. You drag the dead lamb away from the birthing area because leaving corpses near living sheep creates disease risks. You'll add it to the growing pile of casualties that you'll need to dispose of later. This dead lamb represents lost income, wasted resources, another data point in the grim statistics of medieval shepherding mortality rates. The rain is coming down harder now, and wet newborn lambs die frighteningly fast from hypothermia. You're running between ewes, trying to ensure each new lamb is cleaned by its mother, nursing within an hour, and has some shelter from the rain. But you can't manufacture shelter. You're moving lambs under the lee of walls or into the minimal protection of gorse bushes, hoping it's enough. One ewe is in serious trouble. She's been straining for over an hour with no progress. When you examine her, you find the problem: the lamb is coming backward. Breech position. This is survivable if you act fast, but it requires you to reach in again, find the back legs, and pull the lamb out before it suffocates. Lambs can survive a surprising amount of time in the birth canal, but breech births are more dangerous because once the umbilical cord gets compressed, the lamb has only minutes. You're working quickly, your arm inside the ewe again, feeling for legs. You find them back legs, which feel different from front legs once you're experienced. But you're not experienced, so you're second-guessing yourself. You get your fingers around both hocks and pull, timing your pulling with the ewe's contractions. The lamb comes out backward, limp and blue. It's not breathing. You clear the airways. Rub it vigorously. Even try breathing into its nostrils, crude mouth to mouth for a lamb. Nothing. You keep trying because giving up feels wrong. But after 5 minutes of effort, you accept reality. This lamb never took a breath. The mother has already walked away. Another casualty. Historians still argue whether medieval shepherds became emotionally hardened to animal death or whether each loss hurt. From your current position, you can confirm each death hurts, but you can't afford to dwell on it because 3 more ewes are in labor and you've got to keep moving. A ewe delivers triplets. This is both impressive and disastrous. Triplets rarely all survive. The mother doesn't have enough milk, doesn't have enough attention to devote to 3 babies, can't keep them all safe. You watch her try. She licks one clean. The other 2 are ignored. You intervene, trying to help all 3 get cleaned and nursing, but she's actively rejecting the 3rd one. You're now up to 2 orphan lambs needing bottle feeding every 2 hours. The sun finally rises, and you can see the full scope of the night's work. You've got 12 new lambs, 3 dead, 2 orphaned, and 18 more ewes that look ready to deliver today. You're soaked through with rain, birth fluids, and exhaustion. Your arms are bruised and scraped from reaching into ewes. Your back is destroyed from crouching and kneeling on muddy ground for hours. And this is just day 1. Lambing season lasts 6 to 8 weeks. You're calculating milk needs for the orphans. They each need about 8 ounces per feeding, every 2 to 3 hours, which means you need access to significant amounts of milk that you don't have. You'll have to trade labor or goods to obtain milk, which cuts into already thin margins. Or some of these lambs just die because you can't feed them all. A lamb that seemed healthy an hour ago is now hypothermic despite your efforts. It's limp, cold to touch, barely responsive. You bring it to your fire such as it ice and try to warm it. Medieval warming techniques included holding lambs near fires, submerging them in warm water if available, even placing them in ovens at low heat. You're essentially trying to gently cook the lamb back to life without actually cooking it. The line between therapeutic warming and accidental roasting is disturbingly thin. This lamb doesn't recover. Its body temperature dropped too low. Its organs shut down. And despite rewarming, it dies within an hour. Hypothermia was a major killer of newborn lambs, and you had minimal ability to prevent it. Dry bedding, shelter, and ensuring they nursed quickly were your only tools. And when those failed, lambs died. The birthing continues relentlessly. Some are easy. Lamb slides out. Mother starts cleaning immediately. Lamb is up and nursing within 30 minutes. Others are nightmares requiring intervention. One ewe requires you to pull an abnormally large lamb that tears her internally. She's bleeding more than she should, and you know she's probably going to die from internal hemorrhaging or infection. The lamb is alive, but the mother won't survive to raise it. Another orphan. By noon, you've been awake for 30 hours straight. You're hallucinating slightly from exhaustion, and there's no end in sight. More ewes are going into labor. The orphans need feeding. The newborns need checking. Are they nursing? Staying warm? Avoiding getting trampled by the flock? You're making constant rounds, catching maybe 20 minutes of rest before the next crisis. Mastitis hits one of the ewes' infection, making nursing incredibly painful. She kicks her lamb away every time it tries to nurse. You attempt to milk her by hand to relieve pressure and get the lamb fed, but she fights you. The milk is bloody and infected, and you're just spreading bacteria everywhere. The lamb isn't getting adequate nutrition. Both the ewe and lamb are now at high risk. The survival calculations are brutal. Out of 20 lambs born so far, you've lost 6. That's 30% mortality, which is actually close to historical averages for medieval flocks. Modern sheep farming might see 5 to 10% mortality with veterinary care. You're seeing 30% or higher, and there's nothing you can do about it except try to save the ones you can and accept the losses. Sleep deprivation is creating dangerous situations. You're making mistakes forgetting which ewes have delivered, losing track of orphans, missing signs of distress in newborns. Your reaction time is shot. Your judgment is impaired. You're essentially operating heavy machinery in this case. Your own body and decision-making around live animals while severely cognitively compromised. The 72-hour mark is when things get truly surreal. You've now been on continuous lambing watch for 3 days with maybe 5 hours of total sleep in random 15-minute increments. You're seeing things that aren't there, forgetting basic information, struggling to form sentences. But ewes keep delivering, lambs keep needing help, and you keep going because stopping means animals die. Welcome to lambing season's sleep-deprived horror, where spring births mean 72-hour shifts delivering breached lambs, fighting hypothermia, and losing half your newborns anyway, and where you're operating on pure adrenaline and the knowledge that taking a break means death. You're sitting in the mud at the end of lambing season 6 weeks that felt like 6 years, counting your surviving lambs and doing the math that confirms what you already knew. You're trapped. Out of 45 lambs born, 23 survived. That's roughly 50% mortality, which is actually better than some years but still catastrophic by any modern standard. Each dead lamb represents lost income, wasted resources, and months of effort that produced nothing. But here's the real problem. Even with the survivors, you're not breaking even. Let's talk about the economics first, because understanding why you can't escape requires understanding the financial prison you're in. Those 23 surviving lambs will eventually be sold or kept for breeding. If sold for meat, they might fetch prices that seem reasonably a few shillings each, depending on the market. If kept for wool production, they'll generate income over years. But before you see any of that money, there are deductions. Your lord takes his share first. If you're working his sheep, he takes everything and pays you a fixed wage that barely covers subsistence. If you own some sheep but graze on his land, he takes a percentage anywhere from 10 to 50% depending on your agreement and his generosity, which is to say, his greed. Then the church takes its tithe-own tenth of your increase, meaning 2 or 3 lambs are owed to the parish. Then there are taxes, fees, market costs, and various other extractions. What's left after all those deductions is barely enough to feed your family through winter. There's nothing left for emergencies, for buying better breeding stock, for investing in flock health, for saving toward freedom or better opportunities. You're on a treadmill where you work constantly to stay in exactly the same place, and any setback, disease, bad weather, theft, injury pushes you backward into debt. The debt is the real trap. Most shepherds owed money to someone their lord, merchants, money lenders. You borrowed to cover losses from last year. You borrowed to buy feed during winter when grazing was poor. You borrowed to replace sheep that died. Each loan came with interest or obligations that compounded over time. Now you're working not just to survive this year, but to pay back last year's debts. And you're already accumulating new debts for next year. Medieval debt was enforced through social and legal mechanisms that were brutal and inescapable. If you couldn't pay, your property could be seized. You could be forced into additional labor obligations. Your family members could be held responsible. In extreme cases, you could be imprisoned or bound into servitude until the debt was worked off. Bankruptcy in the modern sense didn't exist. You couldn't discharge debts and start fresh. Debts followed you, accumulated, and trapped you permanently. The feudal system itself was designed to extract labor and resources from peasants while preventing upward mobility. You were legally bound to your lord's estate in many regions. You couldn't leave without permission, couldn't change occupations, couldn't move to a town or another manor. The system was explicitly designed to maintain a permanent underclass of workers who had no choice but to continue working for minimal compensation. Even if you weren't a serf, even if you had some legal freedom, the economic realities trapped you just as effectively. Where would you go? Towns had guild systems that prevented outsiders from practicing trades. Other manors weren't looking for shepherds with no resources. You had no capital to start a different life. Your skills were specific to shepherding. You were trapped by practicality even if not by law. The generational trap is particularly cruel. Your children, assuming you have children, assuming they survive medieval childhood mortality rates, are inheriting your position. They're born into shepherding, raised around sheep, taught these skills because what else would they learn? They're entering the same system that trapped you, facing the same impossible economics, destined for the same life of exhaustion and exploitation. You're not just trapped yourself, you're perpetuating the trap into the next generation. Some shepherds did escape. Death was the most common exit disease. Accidents, violence, exposure. Those who died were at least free from the grinding daily reality of shepherding, though calling death an escape is pretty dark. Some escaped through entry into religious life monasteries, sometimes accepted lay brothers who would work their flocks, trading one form of servitude for another. Some escaped through marriage into slightly better situations, though opportunities for shepherds to marry up were limited. Very rarely, someone escaped through exceptional luck, inheriting unexpected property, finding a valuable object, receiving patronage from someone wealthy. But these were lottery ticket odds, the medieval equivalent of winning big in Vegas. For every shepherd who escaped through luck, thousands died in the same situation they were born into. The system was self-reinforcing. The lords needed shepherds to maintain their wool income, so they created conditions that ensured shepherds stayed shepherds. The church benefited from tithes, so they supported the system. Merchants profited from cheap wool, so they maintained low prices. Everyone with power had incentives to keep the system exactly as it was, and the people without power couldn't change it. You're watching your flock graze on this late spring day, and you're doing calculations. How many good years would you need to pay off current debts? 3, maybe 4, assuming no major disasters. How many good years to save enough to buy freedom if you're a serf? 10 years minimum, probably more. How many good years to accumulate enough capital to transition to a different life? Impossible to calculate because it's effectively impossible to achieve. The psychological weight of knowing you're permanently trapped is crushing. Humans need hope, need to believe that effort leads to improvement, that tomorrow might be better than today. You're losing that. You're starting to understand why so many shepherds seemed defeated, why they didn't try to improve their situations, why they just endured day after day. It's not laziness or lack of ambition. It's rational response to a system designed to make effort futile. The wool industry that you're supporting is making other people wealthy. Flemish cloth makers are becoming rich. Italian merchant families are building palaces. English nobles are funding castles and wars. The actual producers of wool, you and your sheep, see almost none of that wealth. The economic exploitation is direct and obvious once you see it, but there's nothing you can do about it. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were conscious of their exploitation or whether they accepted the system as natural and divinely ordained. From your position, you can confirm you're absolutely aware you're being exploited. You can see the math. You know your labor is generating far more value than you receive. You know the system is rigged against you. But being aware doesn't help because you have no leverage to change anything. The isolation that we talked about earlier, it's not accidental. Keeping shepherds isolated prevents them from organizing, from sharing grievances, from coordinating action. If shepherds could unionize, could collectively bargain, could coordinate to demand better treatment, they might have power. But you're scattered across hillsides, working alone, rarely communicating, and even when you do meet other shepherds, there's as much competition as solidarity. The few times peasants did organize and rebel, the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, various other uprisings across medieval Europe, they were crushed violently by authorities who had military power that peasants couldn't match. The message was clear: accept your position or face severe consequences. Most people chose to accept, not because they liked the system, but because rebellion meant death. Your body is breaking down from years of this work. You're developing the chronic health problems that medieval shepherds typically showed: joint problems from constant standing and crouching, respiratory issues from exposure and poor shelter, dental problems from poor nutrition, parasitic infections from handling sick sheep, injuries that healed poorly and left you with permanent limitations. You're aging rapidly, and the work isn't getting easier. The life expectancy for medieval peasants was roughly 30 to 40 years, dragged down by high infant mortality but also by the brutal reality that constant labor, poor nutrition, inadequate health care, and dangerous conditions killed people young. You're probably in your 20s, but you feel 50. Your body hurts constantly. You're exhausted at a cellular level. You can see your own decline happening in real time. Who will care for you when you can't work anymore? Medieval society had minimal social safety nets. Your family might support you if they can afford to, but they're probably struggling themselves. The church might offer minimal charity. More likely, you'll just keep working until you literally can't anymore, then die shortly after from illness or starvation or exposure. There's no retirement for medieval shepherds. You work until you die, and you die working. The next generation of lambs is already growing. In a few months, you'll be preparing for another shearing season, another round of sales, another cycle of the same brutal economics. Next spring will bring another lambing season with its horrors. The year after that, the same. And the year after that. Every year identical. Every year extracting your labor and health and life while giving back barely enough to survive. Some shepherds snapped and did desperate things. They stole from their lords, killed valuable sheep out of spite, abandoned their flocks and disappeared into forests to become outlaws. These acts of rebellion were usually suicidal. Captured thieves were hanged. Runaways were hunted. Outlaws lived short, brutal lives. But at least they were choices, acts of agency in a system designed to eliminate agency. You're not going to rebel. You're not going to run. You're going to keep shepherding because you don't have alternatives, because your family needs the minimal income, because the system has you thoroughly trapped and you know it. This pasture is your prison, and the sentence is life without possibility of parole. The sun is setting on another day, and you're preparing for another night of minimal sleep and constant vigilance. Tomorrow will be like today. Next month will be like this month. Next year will be like this year. You'll keep sheep alive so other people can profit from their wool. You'll watch lambs die and you suffer and predators circle. You'll endure isolation and exhaustion and exploitation. And eventually, you'll die here, having spent your entire life supporting an industry that gave you nothing but survival at the edge of starvation. Welcome to the inescapable feudal trap, where your labor enriches everyone but you. Escape is illegal, and this pasture will be your prison for life, a life that medieval shepherding will make as short and miserable as possible before releasing you through the only exit available: death. And yet, as the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky, there's a strange quiet settling over the pasture. The sheep are finally still, their breathing soft and rhythmic. The wind has died down to barely a whisper. The distant hills fade into shadow, and for just a moment, one brief, suspended moment, the endless struggle pauses. You're exhausted beyond words, beyond thought. Your body has learned to function on autopilot, moving through the motions of securing the flock for night. The orphan lambs are bedded down with their bottles. The ewes are settled. The rams are separated. Everything that can be done has been done, and tomorrow's problems are still hours away. In this twilight space, there's an unexpected peace. Not happiness, you're too worn down for that. Not contentment, the circumstances are too harsh. But a kind of acceptance, maybe, or simply the relief that comes when you stop fighting what you cannot change and just exist in the moment. The stars above are the same stars that shone on shepherds 1,000 years before you, that will shine on shepherds if any remain 1,000 years after. You are part of something ancient and persistent, even if that something is suffering. There's no glory in it, no romance, no redemption, just the quiet knowledge that you survived today, and that might have to be enough. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the sleeping flock. The boundaries between you and the night, between you and the sheep, between consciousness and dreams, begin to blur. Tomorrow will bring its trials, its losses, the small desperate victories. But tomorrow is not yet here. For now, there is only this: the soft darkness, the breathing of animals, the whisper of grass in evening air. Your eyes grow heavy. The exhaustion you've been fighting all day finally wins. And as you drift toward sleep, fitful, brief, but sleep nonetheless, the medieval world and all its harshness fade into something distant and dreamlike. The pasture keeps its vigil. The sheep breathe in darkness. And somewhere between waking and sleeping, you find the only escape medieval shepherding ever offered anyone: the temporary forgiveness of unconsciousness, where for a few precious hours, you are nowhere and no one, free from sheep and obligation and the grinding machinery of exploitation. Sweet dreams, shepherd. Tomorrow comes early, but tonight you can rest.